What you're about to see is an exclusive clip originally released only for Wall Street Unplugged Premium members. We're lifting the curtain and giving you a glimpse inside. Now check us out.
Yesterday, I talked about the PJM power auction, Frank, and just quickly, that's PJM's the largest U.S. grid operator over 13 states, Washington, D.C., 67-ish million people. We talked about yesterday about the demand is growing for gigawatts and power generation. We talked about how from last year's auction to this year's, it was about a 22% jump up. Some more stats for you. A typical natural gas power plant generates about 1 gigawatt. Okay. Now that's 1,000 megawatts. And if you do a quick Google search, it's actually a little bit less than that. And the reason I point that out is because the difference in power demand from last year's auction to this year's auction, Frank, was 5,400 megawatts. Okay. Now, if we're rounding, and I'm being general here, that's about 5.5 gigawatts. Okay. Now, the idea here is, can you build 5 natural gas power plants? Is some of the thinking. You get where I'm going with that?
Yep.
It's like, okay, demand is rising by about 5 natural gas power plants. Now, there's various sizes. You joked about some serious CapEx money going in to generate 100 to 200 gigawatts 10 years out in the future. The point here is this demand is continuing to grow, and it's not slowing down anytime soon. And what I wanted to go into a little bit more detail, we talked about yesterday about how you should have exposure to VST, Vistra. Frank, I don't know if you can pull up any of these. CEG, Constellation Energy. But another one would be NRG and DGXX, which Frank has talked about, DigiPower. That's a much smaller one. But we're all talking about this power generation. Again, we want to talk about the full conversation here, and we're not getting it to today. This will unfold over podcasts in the future. But when you think about this demand for energy in gigawatts, and this is spread across commercial, residential, and industrial. And what I mean by that is you have data centers that are going to add, let's just say 30 gigawatts of power over the next several years. You have EVs and consumer growing energy demand, that's going to add some too. And then you have the industrial size. Frank just talked about when you are allowed to deduct CapEx, if you don't think a massive CapEx wave of money is coming, I would just agree to disagree. One of the big hangups here in an ongoing conversation is going to be, how do we generate the power that we need? So how do you build new power plants? How do you get that power from power generation to the end result end user? And that's basically done through transmission lines. If I told you that a mile of transmission line, so we are transporting energy from, let's say, a power grid to consumers, would you be surprised that it's $1 to $2 million per mile? You wouldn't be?
No.
Okay, because these things have to be expensive, right? In Florida here, you have crazy hurricanes. So a lot of communities, Frank, your community, do you guys have power lines, or are they all underground? Can you see them? And I'm not being funny, because when you start looking around,
they're underground.
They're underground.
They're underground.
So
anyway,
in Amelia Island, where us poor people live,
the villages is all underground too.
on Amelia Island, you can see power lines everywhere, down the roads and everything. Now, certain communities on Amelia Island, they're all underground. And the fun thing there is, well, why don't you just put them all underground? It might be safer and more efficient and all that. It's because of the cost. The cost skyrockets to put them underground. That shouldn't be that surprising. Now, the other big deal here is with transmission lines is permitting and all the red tape and regulations. And I know that some of you do not like President Trump. I'm fine with that. We're not telling you how to think. We simply tell you to think. The point is that I was looking at some information, Frank, that says there's always these backlogs. You know, we look at backlogs in different companies, and you want to look at that. PJM has a backlog of gigawatts. Companies have backlogs of all kinds of things. Frank, over 60 gigawatts of power have not been approved or put into construction to generate power because of red tape and stuff. Now, President Trump has campaigned on the issue of cutting regulation massively, deregulating everything from financial instruments to power generation and stuff. He just gave a speech, I think yesterday, on AI.
It was yesterday. Yep.
And a big proponent of that was cutting red tape. And the point here is, I've grabbed some information, and take all this with a grain of salt, but it's essentially 1 to 2 to 5 to 7 years to build transmission lines and get permitting and stuff. You should take the under on all that. Going forward, that is not going to be the same situation. Now, you're going to open the can of worms, and people are going to yell and scream about ruining the environment and how terrible all this is. All that's BS, and it's going to be called out as BS. And I believe that you're going to see a massive infrastructure build out for transmission lines and all that kind of stuff. So in addition to the VST, NRGs, and such like that, Frank, if you could, pull up EME and also PWR. PWR is Quanta Services. What I like about both these stocks is they are higher price stocks. So this one is 408 and change, and EME is 577. The reason I say high price stocks, remember, we're not talking about value here. The higher price stocks, Frank can add his 2 cents here. I like these because it keeps a lot of the riff-raff away. You don't see a lot of, and I mean that as a compliment, you don't see these constantly going across CNBC and all the ticker symbols. For whatever reason, individual investors, and I will not argue about this now, do not like to buy stocks over $100 for some Florida reason. They like to buy low-price, quote-unquote, stocks in big increments. I have no idea why. I like higher price stocks, AutoZones, O'Reilly. They recently did a stock split. You get my point there. So I like that attraction here. Frank, PWR will report earnings in the next couple weeks. Their last earnings, Q1, the CEO talked about seeing these guys are on the transmission side. So transmission lines, this is how you benefit from them. Put it on your watch list at the very least. The largest investment and expansion of transmission infrastructure in a generation. And he compares that back to the 70s. And the only point there you need to understand, and we have been pounding the table on this, and I'm sorry it's not more exciting, but there is value here, and if you're buying these stocks, you're making money, and that's all that matters. When you go from a period of basically no growth on the electrical grid and demand because of efficiencies and all kinds of things, you're growing at 1 to 2% for decades. And that's hard for me to fathom. I'm Florida 40 years old next year. Decades, half my life, we've seen exactly nothing. And now, and it's hard to jump on the bandwagon at times, and now we're growing at 5 to 7%, which is huge because, like you said, context. You're growing to 1 to 2% to 5 to 7%. That's Florida massive. And the infrastructure and the build out that's in the big, beautiful bill with the CapEx spending, you have the CEOs of these companies telling you these are generational movements. ETN is another one. So you got PWR, EME, GEV, which we talked about yesterday. That's a great one. And then also ETN because they're on the electrification of everything and build out.
So amazing when I look at these charts because they're almost exactly like PWR and MCOR, EME. For a year, one's up 52%, one's up 54%. You look year to date, one's up 27%, the other's 29%. Like the lines go exactly in tandem. So it's which is, you know, usually see some separation in quarters and some companies operate better than others. These are like almost the same. It's almost like just pick or choose and they do exactly the same thing. So which is pretty crazy. But yeah, they're much higher prices. So I think you'll really love Wall Street Unplugged Premium. The Wall Street Unplugged Premium is my members only podcast where I dive even deeper into this week's events. I'll tell you specifically what moves you can make today. Specific investment ideas I'm recommending and tracking each week. Also the news we're picking up from our network of insiders. And becoming a member is super simple and super cheap. So head on over to WSUoffer.com to check it all out. Sign up today and you won't miss a thing. That's WSUoffer.com.